Now, here's it. Anybody tell me what this is made of? What are the buildings? Bits of MDF. No, it isn't MDF actually.
Look like tiles on the side. Terracotta.
Okay. Right. Now, sorry? No, it's not balsa wood. Quite specifically, if you go out and buy canvases like this today, okay?
I know what it is.
There you go, you see? You don't need the blessed wedgies. Why they're there, I don't know. So I used to just chuck them in a box, you know. And one day I thought, I've got to do something with these. And so I got this big canvas out, and this one, you know, it was kind of fairly deliberate. What can I do? Played around, sort of moved them around, this, that, the other. Suddenly there were buildings and bubble miles away. And this end is finished. This is quite sort of metallic. And I've got loads and loads of windows to put in all the rest of this. And I just haven't got around to doing it. I mean, this is 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 years old. I still haven't got around to it. But it's a great example for a demo like this, you know. If I finish it, I'll probably sell it, but you know, it's a great demo piece. So, okay. Again, that's done entirely using colour shapers. There's no brushes involved, no palette knives, nothing else, just colour shapers to make all the textures and everything else. So,
is that one done in oil? Is that just acrylic?
No, that's acrylic. This is acrylic, those are acrylic, that's acrylic. That's acrylic. No, I haven't shown you any oils yet. These are, now, there is, oh, yes, here we go. Well, yeah, there you go. I'll just spread these out on this table, and at the break you can come and have a look, alright? But these are all photographs I've taken over the years, and quite a lot of them I've turned into paintings. And every single one of them is what I call a natural abstract. So you look at that one. Any idea? Yeah, pumpkins chopped in half. Okay, that was on the market. I saw those. I bet nobody gets this one. Hey ho, we'll give it a go. The blue one. Any idea?
It's like a cake.
Blue one. There.
It's like a little cake.
Any idea?
It's like a sweetgrass.
Sorry?
Back in the seat.
That's a fairly good guess, but it's not right. No? Okay, go to Venice and look down on a boat, and it's got a blue canvas covering it over, and that's an aerial view of the blue canvas that's dipped because of the shape and filled with water. Alright? I got 3 paintings out of that boat. Different photographs. It's brilliant. So there's another one. There. Yeah. So all of these are all that kind of thing. You know, go to a fish market. There's loads of fishy images. Go to a botanical garden greenhouse. Oh, I bet you never get that one.
Looks like mould. Looks like there's a seed, not seed. Trees.
It's the rust on a bridge in London. If you walk along the embankment, there's a railway bridge that crosses the Thames, and you go underneath it. And if you look at it, it's the most wonderful colours with rust. they might have painted it by now because it's quite a long way. This one, for instance, beautiful. Isn't that lovely? Yeah. That's diesel on a puddle. Yeah. So I'm out walking, I'm out, you know, I'm not going searching for these things, but when I see them I think, oh, that's absolutely lovely. And it's been created by nature, you know, it might be a natural thing, it might be the cut stumps of a tree. I just look for the patterns, I look for these really interesting patterns. And I've created dozens of these. And I always call them natural abstracts. I don't give them any other title, it's just a natural abstract. And it's faithfully done from nature or architecture. You can go to Arundel, and they set these flints into the buildings to pattern them. And this was down the side of a doorway in Arundel. Yeah, and this one is a reflection of the buildings that I was standing in front of in the window of a building on the opposite side of the road. And all these are slabs of polished, highly polished stone and glass. And this is on the embankment in London, this building. It's around the back, it isn't on the embankment side. It's around the back. I like London. There's loads of opportunities in London for really interesting architectural shapes. So those are natural abstracts where I'm looking at nature or architecture, I'm looking for ideas and inspiration. And then there's the human form, which you can have great fun with. I used to do a lot of classes for life drawing. And so I got into the habit of, rather than sketching the whole model, I'd just sketch a section. And this was an amazing model. It could stand on one leg and hold the leg behind her head. Athletic doesn't come close, I tell you. She was absolutely stunningly good as a model. And this is one of the poses she held for about 10 minutes. And then had a rest and then held it for another 10 minutes. So yeah, good. But I like the idea of just taking a section and kind of looking at it and looking at the form in a slightly different way. And interestingly here, this space is probably, you know, the focal point almost. It's the most important part of the picture as far as I'm concerned. That space is, you know. So, I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but you know, it's another way of looking abstractly at your subject. Yeah. Right, how are we doing for time? Oh, we've got plenty of time. That one for a minute. Well, that's the canvas I'm going to use tonight. There's a couple of works in progress here, they've never got finished. Here I'm using, a definite sort of theme, church buildings, abbey, whatever, ruined or not, and the figures that inhabit these places. So I've got a couple of figures painted into it, and then a suggestion obviously of windows and doors and so on and so forth. This space here needs resolving. I haven't quite worked out what I'm going to do. Slightly Escher-esque in that you couldn't possibly, build this. It kind of, doesn't make sense in one sense, but it isn't intended to. It's intended to give you a sense and a feeling. And actually, I don't know why this theme appeals to me, but I have actually done quite a few based on this idea of using abbeys and churches as the subject matter in this similar kind of way. And again, one of them is, I think one of the best paintings I've ever done, and I won't sell it. It's in my house and I won't part with it. But that one is an interesting story. There's another example of how you can come up with something, because I'd run a workshop in my studio, and I'd got 6 oil painting palettes that were not clean. People had been using them and they were still got paint on them and so on and so forth. They all cleared off about 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and I still had the energy to think. So I thought, rather than just throw the paint away, I got a square canvas out and thought, I'll have a play. And I'll see if I can make a painting with, and restrict myself. I love these challenges, I'll only use this, or I'll only do that, or I will restrict myself to whatever. And in this case, it was 6 palettes of paint with a random set of colours and so on and so on. And what am I going to do to make a painting out of it? And it turned out to be something, you know, on this line with columns and arches and so on and so forth. It was in oil paint, and I did it, I think I used colour shaper a few times and a palette knife. It was mostly palette knife and colour shaper rather than brushes. And yeah, I'm sorry I often bring it to show, but I forgot on this occasion. You have to take my word for it, it's really nice. It's mostly blue. There was a lot of blue for some reason. So there's a lot of dark blue. So it's counterpointed with white and yellow. There's no orange in this one. Nobody got orange on their palette, which would be the usual counterpoint for blue. But so yellow became the really strong counterpoint colour. This one is kind of different in that it's much more. Trying to figure out which way up it is. Yeah, it's that way. After I've finished waffling and we have tea, I'm going to put a canvas up here and we're going to do a community effort, right? I want you to come up and just put some marks on, and then somebody else comes up and puts a mark on that reacts to the mark that's there, and so on and so forth, yeah? And then I, for the last sort of 20 minutes, will try and make sense of it and try and sort of build it into something because I'll be looking for an idea. And believe it or not, I have actually sold several. It's just, I do quite well actually. I know there's one in France that ended up as a motorbike. It was about this big. It was really really textured and really almost crude in its finish, but it had a motorbike sort of image in it, you know. And I was exhibiting it in Bristol, and this guy came in and he just absolutely raved about it. He said, "Oh, this is going to my house in France." So, yeah, there you go. So this one is there's a couple of kind of almost robotic figures here. It's got quite an industrial kind of look to it, but I don't feel it's anywhere near finished. It's too even at the moment. To me, there's not enough contrast in it. Certainly isn't a focal point, and there's not enough contrast in it. So I need to play with it some more. And I haven't looked at it for quite a long time, and I don't think it's a lost cause. Because sometimes I just think, oh, no, waste of time. And I think you have to be able to do that. I think there's no point in flogging something to death. If you've lost your way, and if you really can't, just give it up. That's it. You've learned something from it, that wasn't the way to do it. So just give it up. And I remember I had a student one time. I used to do regular classes, sort of 3 hours in an evening. And I had this lady come, and the way I mostly described it is she came in like this. Yeah? That sort of described her personality, her kind of, she wasn't very sort of upfront and outgoing. But art absolutely changed her. It was amazing, because over a period of weeks, she learned and got better and better and better. And my style was to have 10 or a dozen people sitting around, and they all were doing their own thing. I never did a class as a kind of whole thing. Everybody did their own thing, and I just went around and individually mentored and tutored the individuals on what they wanted to do. And then if I was going to do a quick demonstration to somebody, I'd say, you can come and gather around if you want to, or just carry on working. And that was the style of the class, you see. So Desiree, a lovely lady, Desiree, was sort of sitting here, and I sort of came up behind her, and I said, she said, "What do you think?" I thought, well, perhaps if you do X or Y or Z, or whatever, see how it goes. I wander off. 10, 15 minutes later, I come back and have a look, and she said, "What do you think?" How about So she said, "Oh," and I go away, and I come back 10, 15 minutes later, and I said to her, "Desiree, there comes a time when every artist has to accept that this is a load of crap, and let's just chuck it away." And she said, "Thank goodness for that. I thought you were going to tell me to do something else to it." And I knew at that point that she was a confident, self-confident artist. She knew when to chuck it away. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant example of that idea that you need to grasp, because I see so many beginners just going on and on and on. And you think, oh no, it's just dead in the water, leave it alone. And this kind of work, I think this is great for that. You chuck it on, you move it around, if it doesn't work, you paint it out and you have another go with something else. And it's a great way of liberating you. And that will influence your other stuff. You should see my bird paintings, you know, they're not straightforward. You know, there's a lot of fairly straightforward ones there, and so, but a lot of the stuff I do is you know, much more loose and much more abstract and much more kind of not representational. Yeah? And I think it's a great way to paint. Chuck it on and see where I can. So that's that one. This one I think is much more successful, and this is another example of one of these sessions with another art society. So, and I think that's much more successful. Although I don't think it's quite finished. Do you ever, anybody ever done any Chinese painting? I did quite a bit of Chinese painting at one time. I used to really like the tutor. And because I used to do workshops, because you can always learn. I really believe that you can always learn from somebody. And I used to do workshops with other artists in all kinds of different things. And I went to do Chinese painting one time because I saw Pauline working when I was working. I was doing a course and she was doing a course in the same institution. And I think it was down in Abergavenny, wherever it's called. And so I liked what she did. And so I went and joined one of her classes. And one of the things I learned from her was the idea of the Chinese sense of composition. And they have a little sort of phrase saying that every painting should have a master, a guest, and a servant. And this, to me, has got the master and the guest, but the servant's missing. Right? It's the little thing that just finishes it off, that something or other that gives it a finish. And to me, this space here is crying out for something that will be the servant in the picture. Yeah? Does that make sense?
What's the master of that?
This is the master. Although this is the focal point, your eye is drawn to this, so you might say this is the master, and this is serving, this is the guest, rather. Or you might say it the other way around. In this particular case, it's not blindingly obvious to say which is which. I suppose in the strictest sense, the Chinese would say that this is the master, this is the guest, and the servant would be, to my mind, somewhere in this vicinity here. But I'm not quite sure what the servant is going to be. I've done landscapes sometimes, very simple landscapes that have a sort of Chinese feel to them. And very often the servant is a little clump of grass in the foreground, or a tiny little twisted branch of a little shrub or something like that. It's just, or a boulder even, in the landscape. Just something there to offset the two main features, which might be a big tree and maybe a lake in the background, something like that, you know. But the Chinese painting needs to keep it really simple and keep the marks very, very simple all the time. And I really like that idea when I'm watercolouring, trying to keep it simple. My biggest problem with watercolour is that I just keep going. Especially when I do the birds. I just keep going and going and going. Because I find the feathers so fascinating, so amazingly colourful, and the patterns in them. You ever looked at the side of a teal? It's a work of art, it really is. It's absolutely amazing, the pattern of the feathers on the side of a teal. So I tend to want to put that in, and so I keep going and going and going. So it's difficult. With landscapes, I can relax a lot more. So anyway, that's that. If I was going to offer it for sale, I'd paint the sides. I'd go around and finish it off. Right. I suggest we stop now. I know it's only 5 to 8, but we stop now. and then, you know, have a break. I don't know whether you want to have a break completely and then sort of wander around, or get the tea and whatever, and come sit down and we'll just carry on. It's up to you. Okay? Is that alright? Yeah. Great. Okay. So what I've just done is just chuck some white paint at it to give me, because there's a technique which is called sgraffito. And I remember discovering sgraffito in the 80s when I was starting to paint seriously, and thinking I was really, really clever because I used the end of my brush to do these marks. I was doing a painting of a forest, and there was these silver birch trees against the dark pines and things, and I wanted them to stand out. And the paint was still wet and there was white underneath, so I scratched the silver birches out, and I thought I was really, really clever. And then I read a lot of art history, and I discovered Rembrandt did it when he was a boy. So there's a self-portrait of Rembrandt with his ringlets, and he used sgraffito to create the ringlets. So nothing's new. So I could use the back of the brush like this, and I could scratch marks in. You can't see them probably very well, but you know, there are marks appearing there. Or I can use this, and I can scratch the paint in order to remove some of it, in order to create some interesting texture, perhaps, here and there.
Ship coming in.
Yes, fog.
And then I've scraped the paint off, so I can now think to myself, well, I'll put a bit of contrast here. So I'll put the paint back on thickly in order to cause a contrast, a sharp edge there, between those two surfaces. So I'm not thinking of an idea of what it's going to be at this point in time. I'm simply trying to play with the textures that are there. And I can use other instruments. So I've got this thinner one where I can make smaller marks like this. Similarly, I can put that paint back on as a mark. And there's another size there, so that's a bit boring if I do it again. I've got a palette knife or two here. No? Yes, I have. I've got three in fact. Wow. Two of them is probably good enough for this. So I could do a mark, possibly. No, that doesn't work. Forget that. Paint it again. And this one, which is quite good for doing a similar sort of scratching, taking the paint off. But it's not as good as the silicone. Knives never are as good as the silicone at doing this, taking it off. It's a different kind of scratching mark, which I've just discovered, so I'm going to exploit that mark. And that's what it's all about. It's learning what you can do with what you've got in your hand as you go. Right? There isn't a formula for this. It's all about exploring and having a go and seeing what you can do. Right. So, I've got a palette here. It's a Stay Wet palette. Do you know, the paint's still good in there. Right? I last used that palette on the 15th of January.